The day my son carried my suitcase to the porch, I knew I wasn't a mother anymore. I was just baggage. 60 years of sacrifice, raising him alone after his father left, shrunk to 2 suitcases and a cardboard box in the rain. My name is Margaret Williams, though most people just call me Maggie. And this is the story of how my own flesh and blood threw me away like trash. But don't look at me with pity, because here's the part no one saw coming. The woman they thought was finished, the widow they expected to fade quietly into a cheap motel, I became the one thing they never imagined, stronger, richer, freer than the whole lot of them. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, share this story, and don't forget to leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Because you're about to hear how one betrayal became the sweetest investment of my life. Let me take you back to the morning it all began, October 15th, 2012. The day James, my only son, and his wife Jessica told me to leave their home. It was the day my world collapsed, and the exact day my second life began. The day James carried my suitcase to the porch, I realized I was not his mother anymore. I was baggage he wanted gone. The porch boards were slick from a morning drizzle, and the box with my photo albums soaked up water like a sponge. I kept thinking about the weight of those albums, each page pressed with birthdays, Halloween costumes, science fair medals, and the paper snowflakes James used to tape on our tiny apartment windows. He would stand on a chair to reach the top corners, cheeks flushed, asking if they looked like real snow. I would say yes. Back then, any snow we made was real enough. James would not meet my eyes. His hands were busy doing things that did not need doing. He adjusted the strap on a suitcase that did not need adjusting. He checked a zipper that already closed. The new granite countertop gleamed behind him through the doorway, the one I helped them afford by stretching my Social Security checks and deciding beans and rice were hearty enough most weeks. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and the vanilla candles Jessica loved. It did not smell like me. Jessica stood barefoot on the threshold, arms crossed as if hugging herself from a draft. She had that calm tone people use when they try to make cruelty sound like order. "This arrangement is not working anymore, Maggie," she said, voicing the line as if it had been practiced in a mirror. "You are set in your ways. The children are confused about who leads the house." I turned to James. He had been a tender boy with skinned knees and a way of pressing his forehead into my shoulder when he was tired, as if he could burrow back into my bones. Now his jaw clicked. He kept watching the rain as if the weather were the rude one. "Mom," he said, lower than I remembered. "Maybe it is best. We all need space." "Space," I said, and felt the word in my mouth like a cold coin. "Is that what this is?" Jessica lifted one shoulder. "You will land on your feet. You always do." That was the funny part. They were not wrong. I had landed on my feet through worse. I landed when his father disappeared with our only car and half the savings. I landed when I worked night shifts cleaning offices and day shifts stocking shelves, sleeping on the bus between stops. I landed when I sold our wedding china for rent and told James we were celebrating on paper plates because paper plates make less mess. But landing takes a body that has not been pushed. 20 minutes later, I had 2 suitcases, 1 cardboard box, and a bus pass. James set the suitcases on the porch with careful hands, like he was placing a sleeping child in a crib. I watched the muscle twitch in his cheek and waited for the boy I raised to step forward. He did not. Jessica spoke to the children in the family room. Her voice was honeyed and bright. "Grandma is going on an adventure," she said. "You know she loves adventures." The children did not answer. The television murmured. "Where should I go?" I asked. The question escaped me before I could swallow it. Where does a woman go when her name has been folded and slipped into a drawer? Jessica's smile was clean as glass. "You are a grown woman. You will figure it out." A taxi idled at the curb, blinking, as if waiting for my permission to end an era. I tried to lift both suitcases at once and had to set one down. The cardboard box caved at the corners. A photograph fluttered free, the one of James at 8, front teeth missing, his head tilted toward me like a sunflower. I slid it back into the box. The driver opened the trunk and did not say, "I am sorry." He said meter starts when the wheels move. He did not look unkind. He looked like a man who had seen many porches. I climbed into the back seat. The vinyl cracked along the seams. The rain came down steadier. Through the window, I could see Jessica already straightening the runner in the hallway. She had an eye for lines. James stood by the door, hands buried in pockets as if trying to warm them on coins he would not spend. For a heartbeat, he looked like the little boy who would wait for me on the school steps, lunch pail dented, eyes searching. Then the taxi glided away, and the house became a picture in a book you close because the chapter is over. I will not pretend I was noble. I did not sit with a straight spine and whisper everything happens for a reason. I watched water drag lines through the fog on the window and felt my throat narrow to the width of a button. I pictured the kitchen drawer where I used to keep a stash of chocolate for the children, and the way Emma's face would light up when she thought she had discovered treasure. Did Jessica throw away the chocolate too? Did she keep it and rename it her own? The motel on Route 9 sat between a tire shop and a diner that promised fresh pie on a hand-painted sign. The Sunset Motel. I read the name and almost laughed. The desk clerk, Mr. Patterson, wore a tie that had given up. He slid a key across the counter and an extra towel without comment, as if mercy were a small thing you offer a stranger like a mint. The room smelled like bleach and old air. The bedspread was the color of overcooked peas. The air conditioner coughed itself awake and chattered. On the nightstand was a lamp that leaned, as if it had been listening to other people's stories too long. I set the box of photos on the bed and stared at my hands. They were my mother's hands. They were the hands that held James's feverish brow and tied school shoes and scrubbed juice from the carpet. They did not look like hands that should be idle. I found the remote, turned on the news, turned it off. Silence pooled in the corners of the room in a way that felt heavy, like laundry that never dries. When you are alone in a motel, the first night is the longest. The second night is a copy of the first, and you start to fear the stack of copies that could follow. I lay down with my shoes still on because the floor had a memory I did not want to share. I told myself I would cry for 5 minutes, and then stop. I cried for 6. Then I stared at the ceiling and remembered a day in November when James was 6, and we walked home through air so cold it made our teeth ache. He held my hand and said, "Someday I will buy you a house, Mama. A real one, where the windows do not rattle." I told him we already had a real house because anywhere we were together counted as real. He believed me. I did too. Sleep came in stutters. I woke at 2 to the sound of a couple arguing 2 doors down, at 3 to the scrape of a truck in the parking lot, at 4 to my own name from a dream where James was small again, calling me to come watch the stars. At 5, the sky outside began to gray, and with the gray came a thin blade of calm. Morning, even the cheap kind that leaks around a broken blind, is a promise. It says start again or do not. But here it is. I made coffee with the machine on the counter, a bitter brew that tasted like cardboard and courage. I washed my face in cold water and told the woman in the mirror to stand up straight. There are worse things than being thrown away, I said. You are light enough now to move. I packed the photographs back into the box and pressed the lid down firmly. I opened the motel door and let the morning in. The sky over the tire shop burned a soft pale, the kind of color you only notice when you have lost other things. I could still feel the shape of the house behind me, the rooms I had dusted, the table I had set, the children's voices I loved in a way that had no proper word. Loss has a weight, but there is a second weight too, a quieter one that sits in your hands like new soil. They thought they had ended my story on the porch. They thought the last chapter was the taxi pulling away, the cardboard box collapsing, the rain. But stories do not end with weather. They end when the teller runs out of breath, and I had breath to spare. I had bus routes to learn, and help wanted signs to read, and a library card waiting like a key. They thought they'd thrown me away. What they didn't know was that garbage can grow roots. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Bleach and despair. The kind of chemical sting that told you this room had been cleaned, but never truly made clean. I stepped inside, dragging my suitcase across carpet the color of old oatmeal. The air conditioner hummed weakly from the corner, coughing every few seconds as if it resented being asked to work. The Sunset Motel was its name, a cruel joke if you asked me. Sunsets are beautiful, warm, promising. This place was the aftertaste of a dream gone stale. The neon sign outside buzzed like a dying bee, casting pink light through the crooked blinds. I shut the door, and for the first time in 60 years, I realized I had no place to belong. Mr. Patterson, the manager, had handed me the brass key with 2 hands, as if it were a delicate thing. He was a thin man with a tie that looked like it had lost its fight decades ago. His eyes softened when he glanced at me, the way people look when they know you don't belong in their usual story. "You're not like the usual guests," he said quietly, sliding an extra blanket across the counter. I didn't ask what he meant by usual, though I guessed runaways, men hiding from debts, women hiding from worse. At least I had no one chasing me, unless you count my own shame. I set my cardboard box on the bed. The mattress sank as though it were sighing at the weight. My photographs spilled halfway out, faces peeking from glossy paper. James, at age 8, with his missing front teeth. Emma's baby curls. Tony's first steps caught in blur. I pressed the photos flat, as if smoothing them could press my family back together. I told myself I'd cry for 5 minutes. 5 turned to 30, then to an hour. The walls didn't care. They were painted in a color I can only describe as resignation. I clutched the extra blanket Mr. Patterson had slipped me, and for a moment, I let myself unravel. But here's the thing about unraveling. Once you've scattered, you get to choose how to weave yourself again. And that night, with the sound of tires on wet asphalt outside and the couple arguing in the next room, I made myself a promise. If James and Jessica believed I'd wither away in the shadows, they'd soon regret it. I would not die in this motel. Morning came like a slap, sharp and unapologetic. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the $847 still in my purse. Not much, but I had survived on less. Survival was a language I knew by heart. I walked down to the diner next door, its sign boasting fresh pie daily. The coffee was burnt, the pie stale, but the waitress called me hun, and for a moment I felt less invisible. I bought 1 cup of coffee, sat for an hour, and watched people come and go. Men in paint-splattered boots, women with hair tied back tight, kids tugging on their mother's sleeves, people who had destinations. I had a motel key. By the second week, I knew the motel's rhythms. The construction crew that stayed 3 nights a week, always loud, always broke. The couple in room 4 who fought so hard they sounded like they were tearing wallpaper. The silence after checkout, when the lot emptied and all that remained was the hum of vending machines and the soft shuffle of Mr. Patterson sweeping the walk. One evening he paused outside my door. "You're quieter than the others," he said. I shrugged. What was there to make noise about? He nodded, almost respectful, as if silence was a kind of strength. The nights were hardest. At home, I used to listen for my grandchildren's footsteps, the small stampede of Emma and Tony racing down the hallway. Here, I listened to the air conditioner wheeze and the pipes clank when someone flushed upstairs. Every sound was a reminder that I had been traded for convenience. Jessica wanted order. James wanted peace. What they got was a silence that echoed in my chest. Yet in that silence, a seed stirred. I thought of all the nights years ago when I'd worked 3 jobs, when sleep was a luxury and meals were scraps. I had endured then. Why not now? If my own son thought I was disposable, then I'd make myself indispensable somewhere else. On the 15th night, I pulled out a notebook I'd stuffed in the cardboard box. Its pages were lined and clean, waiting. I wrote 3 words. Not done yet. Underneath, I listed every skill I had. Bookkeeping, budgeting, cooking, sewing. None of it looked like treasure, but treasure is just trash in the wrong hands. I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. The blanket Mr. Patterson had given me was thin, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that kindness still existed in small doses. Enough to remind me that strangers could see what family refused to. As I lay back, I thought of Jessica's words. "You'll land on your feet." She had meant it as dismissal, not encouragement. But maybe she was right. Maybe I'd land, not where she expected, but somewhere higher, brighter, untouchable. The motel walls groaned with the wind outside. The neon buzz seeped through the blinds, painting the room pink and tired. I whispered to myself in the dark, tasting the words like medicine. They threw you away, Maggie. But you're not done. You're just beginning. Sleep took me then, not gentle but firm, like a hand on the shoulder pushing me forward. And in my dream, I saw a garden full of withered plants, each one waiting for me to touch, to water, to coax back to life. When I woke, I knew this. I had no family, no money, but I had one thing left: stubbornness. And stubbornness, as it turns out, can be the root of miracles. Every morning I walked to the library because the library was free. Free air, free heat, free internet. The kind of freedom you cling to when everything else has a price tag you can't touch. I sat in front of the glowing screen, scrolling through job listings, my glasses sliding down the bridge of my nose. Receptionist wanted, minimum 5 years experience, under 40 preferred. Cashier, must work nights, weekends, and smile without stopping. Housekeeper must lift 50 pounds. I applied anyway. I typed out my years of bookkeeping for my late husband's contracting business, my 3 decades of managing bills that stretched thinner than tissue paper. The answers trickled back. cold and rehearsed. We appreciate your application. Unfortunately, I was 60, and apparently 60 meant invisible. Employers wanted young faces, quick hands, people who could be paid less because they needed less. Me, I had crow's feet and knees that cracked in the morning, and that was enough to put me in the discard pile. Some days I walked the whole town, pressing my palms to the glass of store windows, wondering if my reflection looked as desperate as I felt. The clerk at the grocery shook her head before I even opened my mouth. The thrift store manager said they were full up, though I saw the sign taped to the door. Help wanted. By week 4, I was down to eating cereal without milk, because milk was a luxury. My notebook of skills sat on the motel nightstand like a mockingbird. Cooking, sewing, bookkeeping, none of it had gotten me farther than the motel parking lot. One Wednesday, I saw a handwritten sign outside a small building squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop, Mitchell's Garden Center. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, even from the sidewalk. The sign said, "Part-time help wanted. Apply inside." Inside, the store was crowded with clay pots, seed packets, and a jungle of green leaves stretching toward the windows. Behind the counter stood a woman with soil under her fingernails and the sharp eyes of someone who had seen everything twice. "I'm here about the job," I said. My voice cracked on the word job. She looked me up and down. "Experience? 20 years of bookkeeping," I answered. "I handled all the finances for my husband's business. I can organize, track, and balance." Her lips twitched. "Bookkeeping? For plants? I can learn," I said quickly. "Numbers are numbers, and I'm not afraid of work." Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she did not smile easily. She studied me for a long moment, then pushed a stack of receipts across the counter. "These are a mess. Make sense of them. I'll pay $15 an hour part-time. Don't expect much." $15 an hour sounds like the lottery, I said, and I meant it. That night, I held my first paycheck like it was a ticket out of purgatory. $240. Enough to stretch my motel stay another week, enough to buy bread and milk without flinching at the register. Enough to remind me that I still had value. I worked mornings sorting receipts in Sarah's back office. The space was cluttered, boxes stacked high, invoices scattered like leaves. I noticed within 10 minutes she was overpaying her suppliers and charging 2008 prices in 2012. But I kept my mouth shut. Nobody likes a know-it-all on their first week. What caught my attention more than the paperwork were the plants. Rows of them lined the back lot, drooping stems, brown leaves, flowers curled tight in surrender. Sarah shook her head when she saw me staring. "End of season stock," she explained. "Unsellable. They'll hit the dumpster by Friday." I crouched down, touching a brittle leaf with 2 fingers. The soil was dry, but not dead. The stems bent, but still had give. Something stirred in my chest, a recognition so sharp it made my throat ache. "They're not dead," I whispered. "They're just tired, like me." Sarah chuckled without humor. "You can't sell tired. Customers want perfect." Maybe she was right. But as I looked at those discarded plants, I saw myself reflected in every wilted leaf, thrown away too early, written off too soon. That evening, as Sarah locked the shop, I asked, could I take some of those plants home? She frowned. "Home? They're trash." "Maybe, but maybe not." She shrugged. "Suit yourself. Don't come crying when your apartment smells like rot." The next morning, a rusty pickup delivered 3 truckloads of what everyone else called trash. The driver laughed as he unloaded the pots, shaking his head. I carried them one by one up the narrow stairs to my studio above the pizza shop, until every surface was covered. The windowsills sagged under clay pots. The floor became a maze of leaves and stems. My tiny apartment looked like a jungle of broken things, but for the first time since being thrown out, I felt alive. That night, I watered them gently, spoke to them as though they were old friends waking from a long sleep. Maybe we're not done yet, I told them. Maybe we're just waiting for a second chance. The motel had been my grave. This little forest of rejects would be my breath. So I carried home 3 truckloads of what everyone else called trash. And I was about to find out just how wrong they were. My studio above the pizza shop wasn't much, but once the plants arrived, it became something else entirely. At first, it looked like a jungle had broken into my apartment and refused to leave. Pots cluttered every corner. The windowsills sagged under the weight of clay. The floor turned into a maze where one wrong step meant snapping a brittle stem. The smell was sharp, half soil and half hope. I worked in silence, watering carefully, trimming leaves with kitchen scissors, whispering to each one like they could hear me. Maybe they could. People think talking to plants is crazy, but what else are you supposed to do when the world has gone silent? I told them things I couldn't tell anyone else, how I felt invisible, how my son's voice still rang in my ears when he said space, how the motel sheets smelled like bleach and shame. The plants never argued, they only listened. Nights blurred into mornings. I came home from Mitchell's garden center, peeled off my shoes, and went straight to my green wards. I misted leaves, checked soil, rotated pots so every stem got a fair shot at the light. Slowly, stubbornly, they responded. Brown leaves fell away. New shoots pushed upward, thin and trembling but alive. A single bud here, a sprout there, until the apartment that once felt like a coffin began to feel like a cathedral. Mrs. Chen from downstairs was the first to complain. She caught me in the stairwell one morning, squinting at the watering can in my hand. "Too many plants," she muttered in her clipped English. "Smells like swamp." I just smiled. Better a swamp than a graveyard. She shook her head like I was insane. Maybe I was, but at least I was an insane woman with a purpose. I began to notice something else. As the plants revived, so did I. My back still ached in the mornings, but it was the ache of work, not despair. My hands grew calloused again, but they were the kind of calluses that prove you've been busy living. The empty air of the motel had been a weight, pressing me down. Here, in this cramped room full of green, every breath was lighter. By February, nearly every pot showed signs of life. Shoots of green unfurled like flags. Flowers bloomed in stubborn defiance of winter. The room buzzed with a quiet energy, the kind you only feel when something has been saved from the edge. I looked around one night, surrounded by hundreds of little victories, and realized I had built a sanctuary out of what others called trash. When I carried the first batch back to Sarah's store, my heart pounded like I was about to sit an exam. I loaded the pots into borrowed boxes, drove them in a borrowed truck, and arranged them in the back lot where I'd first found them, half dead. The February air was sharp, but the plants stood upright, leaves glossy, blossoms bright. Sarah walked out, wiping soil on her jeans. She stopped mid-stride. Her jaw slackened. "What in God's name did you do to them?" "Talk to them," I said, keeping my voice casual. Gave them water, patience, sunlight, a little stubbornness. She touched a leaf, rubbed it between her fingers. These look better than when they were new. Inside, I wanted to laugh, to cry, to shout. "See? You threw me away, and I'm still here." Instead, I just said, "Told you they weren't dead. Sarah bought every single one for half their retail price. In one afternoon, I made more money than my first month of bookkeeping. But the cash wasn't the point. The point was that something I had done, my care, my persistence, my refusal to give up, had turned waste into worth. I loaded the bills into my purse and walked out of the shop taller than I had walked in. The town hadn't changed. The streets were the same. The pawn shop still had its neon open sign blinking like a tired eye. The pizza shop still reeked of garlic. But I wasn't the same. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. People had looked right through me since James shut that door, as though I'd ceased to exist the moment I wasn't useful to him anymore. But now Sarah's eyes had widened. Now she had to admit I'd done something extraordinary. I climbed the narrow stairs back to my apartment, the money heavy in my pocket, the boxes empty in my hands. I pushed open the door and stood in the humid air of my green cathedral. The plants rustled softly as if greeting me home, and I whispered to them, "We're not worthless. Not anymore." That night, I sat by the window, staring at the streetlights below. I thought of Jessica's smirk when she told me I was too set in my ways. I thought of James looking away as I climbed into that taxi. And I thought of the rows of thriving plants, filling my little apartment with proof that they had been wrong. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was valuable. And that value was about to grow roots far deeper than even I could imagine. The first time Sarah asked me to take more plants, I thought she was joking. She wheeled out a cart stacked with wilted geraniums and sagging ferns, the kind of green most people wouldn't waste water on. "You worked a miracle last time," she said, tilting her head. "Think you can do it again?" I shrugged like it was nothing, though inside I felt the pulse of possibility. "Give them to me," I said. "They'll be back." Word traveled faster than I expected. Gardeners gossip like church ladies. Within a month, another small nursery called, asking if I'd take their unsellable stock too. "That crazy plant woman," they whispered. "She makes dead things breathe again." I didn't correct them. Crazy was fine, as long as it paid rent. Soon, my apartment looked less like a home and more like a jungle warehouse. The pizza guy downstairs complained that his customers couldn't find parking because my pots lined the lot like soldiers. Even Mrs. Chen from the first floor stopped muttering, "Too many plants," and started asking if I had a fern for her sister. I had stumbled into something bigger than survival. I had stumbled into a system. Waste in, life out. Trash transformed into treasure. For the first time since James locked me out, I wasn't just existing, I was building. I opened a notebook and began sketching out what this could be. Numbers, schedules, projections. I stayed up late, my fingers smudged with ink. My desk covered with receipts. I realized this wasn't a side hustle. It was a blueprint. One evening, Sarah and I sat over paper cups of coffee in her cluttered office. She leaned back, arms crossed. "You're onto something, Maggie. Bigger than both of us." I raised an eyebrow. "Bigger how?" "I'm one woman with a watering can and some stubborn plants." "Not for long," she said. "Think about it. Every garden center throws away thousands every season. What if you turned it into profit? Not just here, everywhere." Her words lodged in my chest. Profit everywhere. It sounded too big, too grand for someone who had been living out of a motel not long ago. But Sarah's eyes didn't blink, and I realized she wasn't flattering me. She was daring me. I named it Phoenix Plant Recovery, because everything deserved a second chance. Plants, people, widows with nowhere to go. I sketched a logo on scrap paper, a green shoot curling upward like fire. It wasn't polished, but it was mine. The next hurdle was money. To expand, I needed space. More than my apartment, more than Sarah's back lot. I needed a warehouse, and warehouses cost more than stubbornness. So I put on my best dress and walked into a bank. My hands shook as I carried the thick folder of numbers, photos, and testimonials. I could still feel the weight of those suitcases James had carried to the porch, like ghosts pulling on my arms. But I told myself, if I could survive being thrown out, I can survive this too. The loan officer peered over his glasses, skeptical. "You want how much?" $150,000, I said, steady as stone, to expand Phoenix plant recovery. "And what exactly do you do?" he asked. "I turn waste into profit," I answered. "I take what the world calls dead and make it live again." He raised an eyebrow, but I slid the photos across the desk. Before and after. Wilted, then thriving. Trash, then treasure. He flipped through them slowly. My pulse thudded like a drum in my ears. Weeks later, the call came, approved. I sat on the motel bed where it had all begun, clutching the letter until my hands cramped. My empire-to-be had just been born on bank letterhead. I found a warehouse on the edge of town, 5,000 square feet of empty promise. The floor was cracked, the roof leaked, but the light poured in wide windows like grace. I signed the lease with shaking fingers. The landlord asked if I was sure. I smiled. I've been sure since the day they threw me out. I hired 2 part-time helpers, both young men who had been told they weren't good enough anywhere else. I handed them watering cans and said, "Prove them wrong." Their faces lit up, the same way my plants did when they felt the sun. By the end of that year, Phoenix Plant Recovery had contracts with 15 garden centers across 3 states. What had started as 3 truckloads of trash had become a network, a system, a lifeline. I wasn't just saving plants anymore. I was saving myself. At night, I sat on a folding chair in the middle of my warehouse, surrounded by rows of pots, whispering green. I thought about James and Jessica, about the way their faces looked as they shut the door on me. They thought I was finished. Instead, I was just beginning. People love to talk about miracles as if they drop from the sky, but I learned that sometimes miracles crawl up from the dirt, stubborn and slow, until one day they bloom where no one expected. And that's how a widow with 2 suitcases became the founder of a business empire. 6 years after that taxi pulled away from my son's porch, I stood in the grand foyer of Hillcrest Estate. Marble tiles stretched out like a frozen river beneath my feet. Chandeliers glimmered overhead like captured stars, and the echo of my footsteps was the only sound. My voice, if I had spoken, would have bounced off the walls and come back to me like a ghost. But I didn't speak. I only smiled. Through the tall windows of the master bedroom, I could see the whole town spread below me. Church steeples, grocery rooftops, streets that once felt endless under my tired feet, and beyond them, tucked neatly into a quiet neighborhood, sat the modest colonial house where James and Jessica still lived. The very house where my suitcases had been left on the porch in the rain. I leaned against the window frame and laughed. The sound startled even me. Once upon a time, I'd been paying $43 a night at the Sunset Motel, clutching my purse like it was a lifeline. Now I held the deed to the most expensive property in the county. From bleach-stained bedspreads to silk curtains that draped the floor. If that isn't transformation, I don't know what is. The realtor, Jennifer Walsh, had nearly dropped her pen when I made the offer. "Maggie, are you certain? $4 million is no small commitment. I'd smiled, calm as ice. I've survived worse commitments. This one comes with a better view. Cash doesn't just buy property, it buys silence. The kind of silence where you can stand in a 12,000 square foot home and hear your own breathing. I wandered through rooms that looked like they belonged in magazines, a kitchen built for a chef, a library lined with mahogany shelves, a conservatory where light poured in like holy water, and every corner whispered the same truth. You were never the burden. You were the foundation. The movers brought in my old apartment furniture, and it looked ridiculous, my sagging sofa sitting in the middle of a ballroom, but I didn't mind. It was like proof of my journey, a relic of the motel years planted in the heart of my empire. That first night I sat on the back deck with a glass of water, yes, just water, and watched the sky burn pink and gold over my 8 acres. The air smelled of grass and quiet money. For the first time in decades, I didn't hear neighbors arguing, or the hum of a broken air conditioner, or Jessica's sharp voice telling me I was in the way. All I heard was peace. I thought of James. Did he ever drive up Hillcrest Drive just to stare at these gates wishing? I remembered his Sunday drives, when he and Jessica would pass through this neighborhood pretending it was theirs. Now it was mine, and I hadn't needed either of them to get it. The irony was sweeter than any pie I'd ever baked. When the local paper announced the sale, my phone buzzed with messages. Old acquaintances who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my number. Eleanor, my business mentor, texted. Saw the deed transfer. You magnificent woman. Champagne soon. I typed back. Bring the good stuff. We'll toast to survival. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about survival. This was victory. I slept that night in a master bedroom big enough to hold my entire old apartment. The bed sheets were crisp, the pillows piled high. Yet when I closed my eyes, I still saw rain dripping off a porch roof, soaking into cardboard. That memory would never leave. And maybe it shouldn't. It was my compass, reminding me how far I had climbed. The next morning, I padded barefoot across marble floors, opening cabinets like a child in a toy store. Every drawer slid smooth, every hinge whispered wealth. I laughed again, because laughter fit me better now than tears. Standing in that house, I realized something James and Jessica had never understood. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who stays when life gets dark. And when they left me standing in the rain, they freed me to build a life without them. But pride is a dangerous thing, and peace, if you hold it too tightly, has a way of slipping. Because less than 24 hours after I moved in, as I was still figuring out which cabinet held the coffee mugs, the doorbell rang. And on the other side of that grand oak door stood the ghosts I thought I'd buried. Except they weren't ghosts at all. They were flesh and blood, and they wanted something. The doorbell chimed like church bells mocking me. I padded across the marble floor, coffee mug in hand, and glanced at the security screen. And there they were. James, my only son, older now, a gray streak cutting through his hair. Jessica beside him, lips painted too bright, smile sharpened to a blade. And behind them, 2 teenagers I barely recognized. Emma, taller than I remembered, her eyes holding the same flicker of curiosity she'd had as a child. Tony, almost grown, broad-shouldered, shifting uncomfortably in his 2 big sneakers. 6 years of silence, and suddenly they had discovered the meaning of family. How convenient. I let them stand a full minute before opening the door. Well, well, I said, not bothering to hide my smirk. If it isn't James, Jessica, and the children I barely know. James cleared his throat. Mom, we read about the house. We just wanted to congratulate you. Congratulations delivered, I said. Anything else? Jessica stepped forward, her smile rehearsed. Maggie, we know things ended badly. We've had time to reflect, and we realize we handled it wrong. Handled it wrong, I repeated, sipping my coffee. Is that what we're calling it now? Emma shifted from foot to foot. Grandma Maggie? Mom said you used to make amazing chocolate chip cookies. The innocence of that comment struck me harder than all of Jessica's false sweetness. 6 years. They had stolen 6 years of cookies, of stories, of love, stolen them from me and from her. Cookies, I said softly, then stepped aside. Come in. Since we're pretending to be family again, let's do it in the living room. They gasped as they entered, eyes darting across the chandeliers, the silk wallpaper, the Persian rugs that swallowed their shoes. Tony ran to the window. Mom, look at the pool. Jessica's gaze swept the room differently, calculating square footage, estimating worth. It's spacious, she said carefully. Too much for one person, don't you think? I settled into my velvet armchair. I find I quite like having room to breathe. James sat awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, afraid to crease the fabric. Mom, about what happened 6 years ago, and we were stressed. New mortgage, job uncertainty, kids so young. So naturally the solution was to make your widowed mother homeless, I interrupted. Very logical. Jessica's smile cracked. We thought you'd figure something out. You've always been so independent. You mean you didn't care, I said. The silence thickened. Then Tony asked, Dad, what is she talking about? I leaned forward. Sit down, both of you. It's time you learned the truth. James paled. Mom, don't. 6 years ago, I began. After your grandfather died, I moved in to help. I cooked, I cleaned, I contributed my Social Security checks. But one morning, your mother decided I was too set in my ways. Your father carried my suitcases to the porch. They left me with $847 and nowhere to go. Emma's eyes widened. That's not what they told us. No, I said. They told you I moved to Florida, that I didn't want to see you anymore. Jessica bristled. You undermined our parenting. You confused the children. I taught them to say please and thank you, I snapped. Apparently that was a crime in your kingdom. The children stared at their parents. The cracks spread fast. Emma's face flushed red. You lied to us. You said she abandoned us. Tony looked at James, his voice trembling. Is it true? Did you really kick her out? James buried his face in his hands. He couldn't even look at them. I stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased, but intact. I handed it to James. Do you remember this? Jessica frowned. What's that? James didn't answer. His hand shook as he unfolded the letter. I kept it, I said, my voice low but steady. The night you came to my apartment, half drunk, begging me to come back. You wrote this letter, James. You said you had made a terrible mistake. You said the house felt empty without me. You begged me not to tell Jessica, because she'd threatened to leave if I returned. Jessica's head snapped toward him. What? James whispered. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. So you lied to me for 6 years, she spat. To all of us. Emma's voice broke. You stole my grandmother. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Tony stood, fists clenched. All this time we thought she left us. But it was you. Both of you. Jessica's mask finally shattered. She turned to me, fury in her eyes. This is ridiculous. We're family, Maggie. You can't just erase us. I leaned back in my chair, every inch the queen of the castle they thought I'd never enter. I lowered my voice to a whisper sharp enough to cut glass. That's exactly why you're not welcome. The living room felt like a stage after the curtain had dropped. Jessica's voice still rang in the walls, sharp and bitter, her perfume hanging in the air like smoke. James sat, slumped on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped so tightly I thought the veins would burst. And in front of me, Emma and Tony, two children who were no longer children, stood frozen, their faces pale with betrayal. I broke the silence first. Listen carefully, I said, each word slow, deliberate. Emma, Tony, you are welcome here any time you wish. Day or night, this house has doors that will always open for you. Emma blinked, her eyes glistening. Really? Really, I said. But as for your parents, I let my gaze settle on James, then shift to the door where Jessica had just stormed out. They will have to earn their place back. Not with apologies, not with tears, but with proof, with actions. James opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. Don't. I've heard every excuse you can craft. I don't want words anymore. Show me you've changed. Stand on your own feet. Tell your children the truth about what you did. Until then, you are not welcome. Emma's chin trembled. Then, with a sudden rush, she crossed the room and threw her arms around me. Grandma, she whispered, the word stumbling out of her like it had been waiting years to escape. I'm so sorry they lied. The word cut me open and stitched me back together all at once. Grandma. I had almost forgotten how it sounded. For 6 years, silence had stolen that name from me. Now it was given back. I held her close, stroked her hair, and whispered, It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. Tony followed, awkward but determined. His arms wrapped around me in a quick, shy hug. I want to come back, he muttered. I don't care what Mom says. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. You'll always have a place here. Across the room, James shifted uncomfortably. His eyes glistened, but he refused to meet mine. He bowed his head like a man staring at his own grave. The son who once promised he'd buy me a real house someday was now standing in the house I had bought without him, and that irony pressed on him heavier than marble. Jessica's voice echoed faintly from the hall. James, are you coming or not? Her footsteps clicked down the marble, fast and furious. A moment later, the front door slammed like a gunshot. James rose slowly. His shoulders slumped. He glanced at his children, then at me. For a moment, his lips parted, as if he might say the words I'd waited 6 years to hear. But he only sighed, shook his head, and walked out into the night. The silence that followed was different. Not the hollow silence of the motel room, not the bitter silence of rejection, but a silence thick with justice. The kind of silence that doesn't need applause because truth itself is loud enough. Later, after Emma and Tony left with promises to return, I carried my coffee onto the terrace. The garden stretched wide before me, green and alive, every leaf trembling in the night breeze. I sipped from the porcelain cup, its rim cool against my lips, and let the warmth settle in my chest. Being thrown away doesn't mean worthless, it means free. I said it aloud, not for the world, but for myself. Free from begging for love that wasn't love. Free from carrying the weight of other people's lies. Free to grow like the plants I once carried home in cracked pots, dead to everyone but me. The moonlight fell across the marble steps, turning the garden silver. I stood there, remembering the porch where my life had been reduced to 2 suitcases and a box. Remembering the motel's bleach-stained sheets, remembering the day I chose not to wither. Some victories are loud, with cheering crowds and trumpets. Mine was quiet, measured in breaths, in stubborn roots, in the way my grandchildren's voices had called me Grandma again. I thought it was the end of the story. But life doesn't tie bows neatly, not even in houses with chandeliers and acres of manicured lawns. Just when I thought the story was over, life was already writing the next chapter. And I had a feeling it would be louder than silence. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.